Explorer. Oh, we've put the sound on now, so you wouldn't have been able to hear me. I've now worked out. So we now have sound and we now have pictures. So welcome everyone to our afternoon webinar. My name's Claire Clinton and I'm here for the next half an hour, 40 minutes to maybe answer some of your questions and also to help you think about prejudice and challenging things in the classroom in that context of trying to prepare pupils to be a success and make successful contributions to life in modern Britain. So if you've not been here before, I'll take you through a few bits of housekeeping. If you have been, twiddle your thumbs for a moment. So if you can see and hear me, that's very good. And you will notice that below where I am, there is a box where you can type in any questions that you might want to send us through the session. And also, again, underneath, you will see there's a PowerPoint presentation. And you can open that up and work through with just listening to me as you look at that. Or you may want to just split screen it so there's me and the PowerPoint. And I know some of you have already printed it out and will be making notes on as we go through. So welcome. It's not a very nice day. I always do an update from the office. It is bright today, but it is a bit grey and not very warm. And I was saying earlier how glad I am that today I brought my cardigan to work, because I think I would have been quite cold up in my room, very high up. It's been quite windy up here. So I hope you've also had a good day, and I hope that today's webinar will help you to think a little bit more about religious literacy. Our last two sessions, we focused on Judaism and Islam, and we've been thinking and learning more about those religions and the diversity of views and beliefs within them. That where there are central things that everyone agrees on, there are also some things that people don't. And so today we're thinking a little bit more about how we challenge successfully in the classroom prejudice and handling sensitive issues, handling sort of prejudice and challenging it, I think can be quite challenging for us as teachers. I've been a teacher for quite a long time now. And I can remember when I first started, I was in a secondary school, so teaching RE virtually all of the time. Even for myself, with all that subject knowledge, you don't really want to upset people, and you don't really want to inflame people or allow people to express things so strongly that you don't know what to do when all of this sort of flies around in the classroom. And I think for many primary and secondary school teachers, those same feelings would be true. And so hopefully today we can help you a little bit with thinking about why it's important to challenge things and how to do that successfully. I think it's always important to remember that as a teacher, you're never on your own. I know sometimes we are on our own in our classrooms, but you're part of a phase group or a year group, you're part of a school where there are other people at other stages in their teaching career who can come alongside and really support you in sort of challenging situations. So, moving on down the PowerPoints now. Interfaith Explorers, you've obviously found the website to have found me, but on there are a whole load of resources to help schools begin to enable pupils to dialogue around religion successfully. And this could be part of their RE lessons, it could be part of their PSHE or citizenship time. And we are coming up to a perfect time for Year 5 and Year 6s after May half term to have a little bit more time to maybe look at some of these issues and to think of some of these things. So I would really encourage you to go and have a look at some of those resources on there and let the children have that experience of some of these interfaith conversations. So we're also here to help you and support you in your professional development. And I think poll on poll that we hear about in newspapers time after time on professional development, it talks about how teachers are the most needy group out of any of the different professions. And that's because, one, I suppose the government seeks to use us to talk about issues that they think are important. But two, it's the breadth of what we have to do. And three, it's the fact that curriculum and things are ever changing and nothing stays the same. And so there's always this continual need to upskill, but also up our knowledge around things. So we hope today will give you some space to think around an important issue. So my name's Claire. I've mentioned that already at the start, and I'm an RE advisor. And I work in the London Borough of Newham, which I really enjoy, and I also live here, and both my children have been educated in schools here. And I was talking to my beautiful assistant to one side about a programme that was on television last night that was about Newham and white flight. And I suppose, though I was just saying that my family moved here from a persecution situation in France, and that was between the Catholic Church and the emerging Protestants about 400 years ago. And they came to Whitechapel and then Bow and then this area where I am staying, sort of Stratford and Forest Gate, and gradually kept on moving until they got basically as far as Colchester, where my family settled for a long time. And what's interesting is that I suppose I've moved back here, and so being a white British person who's brought up both of her children here and at the schools here, I have done the opposite maybe of some people with white flight. Maybe 400 years ago there was some flight, but I think that was around doing better and moving on and finding places that had bigger gardens and all of those sorts of things. And so the East End has always been this melting pot, hasn't it, of different people coming in, different immigrant populations, and I suppose my story is part of that. But my boys have had a great time in schools here, and I'm very proud of the education that they've had here. And I hope that in your school, wherever you are, if you're in a monocultural situation or if you're in a very diverse situation, racially, religiously, culturally, similar to here, that you'll see the benefits of helping children with their religious literacy so that they are able to talk and understand images and information that they're hearing as global citizens every day. Whether they are online, whether they're watching telly, whether they're listening to adults around them. They actually need quite a lot of foundations and scaffolding to help them make sense of images and comments that they may come across, and know where to pigeonhole those and how to understand those. So that's what we're aiming to do today. So I'm now on the slide that says session objectives. And so today we want to think a little bit about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And they've been chosen partly because we've done these two other webinars the last 2 months on Judaism and Islam, but also there's been quite a lot around this recently within the press. And so we thought it might be helpful for teachers to think a little bit more about that. And through that, we want to talk about how we can promote tolerance and respect, thinking about these fundamental British values that the government has asked us as educationalists to help children understand. And the bit that's motivational in that is this idea of moving from tolerance to respect, to move from stereotypes into understanding, into real characters and real people that we've come across and we get to understand. And so that we're no longer prejudging and we're not happy. Stereotypes don't sit well with us. We're no longer happy with them. We notice them. Because that's one of the things about stereotypes is we don't notice them. when we're using them, because we think we are speaking genuinely, and it's that lack of experience and that lack of knowledge that leads to those. And so we want young people, as I mentioned earlier, that can really participate in and make positive contributions to life in modern Britain. And that's the part of the fundamental British values that motivates me as a teacher. So I became a teacher all those years ago, is I wanted to help young people achieve their potential. And that's not just in an academic sense, that's also in terms of their well-being and in terms of their cultural and their social well-being, that they can mix and that they can do well in situations. And I'm sure, like you sort of share those values with me. I don't think anybody stays a long time in teaching if they don't. I think it's far too much relentlessly hard work. Anyway, we also want to talk about religious literacy. And I was at a conference last week, a national conference, and people were talking there about the importance of religious literacy and some of the recommendations that have been given to government recently from a sort of group that the government put together to think about religious literacy was that teachers needed equal training time in English, maths and religious education, because our world is complex, there are many nuances and a greater need for understanding, so that children and young people do not do what at the moment our society tends to do around religion and politics, which is either show no interest whatsoever or are very passionate about the topic that you bring up, and that may be in a negative way or in a positive way. And actually we need to have everybody in society able to understand and to dialogue around these things, so that these things cannot be used by others to, I suppose, close down conversation, to close down community, and to set one group against another group. So we also want today to give you some practical activities that you can use. I've mentioned a whole number that are on the website already, but I will encourage you later to go and use some of those. So let's start off with our definition of religious literacy. And it's the knowledge and ability to understand religion. So that's very straightforward. And I suppose our British context, there's been stuff in the newspapers actually the last few days talking about people who traditionally, I suppose, would have put themselves in a Christian background or a Christian camp, beginning to talk about the fact that they have no religion. And so that's a really big changing face of our society, and also that we have so many different belief systems within our society. And though we may have heard of Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and Sikhism, there are other isms that maybe don't have the numbers, but are still present within our society. And actually to be understanding and to understand choices that people make, if you have no knowledge of those, or you don't have the skills to listen and find out and know where to go to find out about things, it's going to leave all of us with a lack of being able to understand. So our context and our faith communities, I think, are a growing important area of British life, and how we cope and how we work and live well together is important. So the Commission on Religion and Belief in Public Life, there's a little quote there, and they said the potential for misunderstanding and stereotyping and oversimplification based on ignorance is huge, and schools have a big part to play in putting this right. And that report is saying that actually things have to be done across the whole nation, but the children that we're educating at the moment are the potential leaders of our country 5, 10, 15 years time. And so if they come out and are not religiously literate, then that oversimplification carries on. ignorance carries on. Fear has a hold, because ignorance and fear usually go together and draw on one another. So we thought we'd start off with some definitions of anti-Semitism, and you should be able to see those on the slide, just taken from 3 different places. Hostility or prejudice towards Jews pretty much sums those up very well. And it's interesting that the final bullet point with the European Union, it talks about it's a certain perception of Jews. And if we look back in our literature, and if you look back in cartoons and all sorts of things, you can see these perceptions about Jewish people being there. I used to teach in my secondary school religious studies and religious education, but I also used to do drama and theatre studies. And at one time at A-level, I was teaching Measure for Measure, a Shakespeare play. And within that, the Jewish character fits stereotypes of somebody who's grasping for money, trying to become very rich, very stingy, not to be trusted. So all these things that 500 years ago maybe were in British society. It's these perceptions, and they're expressed in sort of towards sort of hatred, really, of anything Jewish. And again, prejudice, we know, is a prejudgment. It's not based on credible experience. It's usually based on ignorance, and as I said, it leads to fear. So what was interesting for me was then to look around some of the statistical information about anti-Semitism in Britain, in the UK today. And YouGov commissioned a survey of about sort of 2,200 Jewish people last year, asking them a whole number of questions about how they feel. And so we have to say, just because somebody feels something doesn't mean that that's reality. But what it does tell us is that that's their perception of what's happening around them. And so media images and I suppose conversations all play into that. And particularly in the Labour Party recently, sort of things that people have tweeted and things that people have said, that people have gone back and looked at these things, or comments have come into, I suppose, a greater public domain. And so Jews have felt sort of a sense that these perceptions of them, these stereotypes of them, that this simple oversimplification, I've said simple too many times there, sorry, is what's going on. And that's not healthy, and that's not good, and that doesn't represent them. And so therefore, in that sense, it's not fair. So let's just look at some of those statistics. So 40%, 45% felt their family is threatened by Islamist extremism. And so that, it's interesting, isn't it? Sort of one group feeling about another group. And but I think that would be true if we look at our newspapers and headings and what's going on. And yeah, there's a certain level of fear of what might be happening because of world events and where things will be targeted. And certain groups that call themselves Muslim or Islamic, that many Muslims would not accept, could be, that those are in the press, and so therefore there's a very natural worry. I would imagine that if you asked people that were not religious at all, they would also say that they feel quite threatened, that it's not just a Jewish thing. But I think there is an aspect of the political world where we have Israel and Palestine, and we have a political conflict there, which also involves religion, because religion is important to those people who are part of that conflict, whether they are people in the population with no power, or whether they are people who are leading within those countries, who have some power, that religion then and politics is woven together. And therefore, without knowing enough about history, without knowing enough about people on the other side, that it's very easy for Israel to equal all Jews. It's very easy for Palestine or Hamas or whoever to equal all Muslims. And we find that from time to time here in Newham, I have to say, sort of when we're teaching Judaism, that we have to help the children understand that not all Jewish people are the same. And not all Jewish people go and live in Israel. And not all Jewish people want to do that. That there are Jewish people who are very happy here, in the same way as not all Muslims want to go and live in Saudi Arabia. They may go there on pilgrimage, but they don't want to live there the whole time. That isn't where they feel their home is. And so all of these things are complex. You can see why it's so easy for people to stereotype, to oversimplify, and in a sense, that's easier, isn't it, than actually finding things out properly. So I think the two sort of other strong things that came out from that survey around how Jewish people were feeling was about the media bias towards sort of Jews and Israel. In a sense, the media bias towards Israel being seen as bad and wrong and hardline and unfeeling, also affects their lives. So even if they were to not agree with some of the political decisions, there's this thing where Israel and Jews are lumped together. And actually, we'll see exactly the same thing happens often with terminology around the West and Muslims. And they can often be put as separate things. And that really is not helpful, because so many Muslims have been born in the West and role to play, but also media, particularly newspapers, are having to say sometimes, they need headlines to sell. And so sensationalism and oversimplification tend to be more attractive to pick up and buy than maybe reason and facts at times. Yes, I hope that's fair. But anyway, so I was interested by how these 2,200 Jews were feeling last year around some of these things. Now, I've just mentioned about Muslims in the West, so let's just go on to Islamophobia. So Islamophobia, interesting, there's a programme on the BBC last year and was saying that sort of crime in London was up by 70%. Now, why would that be? And again, without trying to oversimplify simple history, but if people are feeling worried that there are Muslim people who want to destroy the way that you live and the way that your society works, it stands to reason then that you might begin to see all of those people equally worrying. And I suppose I would say that there's going to be a link with that rise to a link of how people are feeling worried, and that's all to do with world issues. It's not necessarily to do with Muslims here, though of course there have been Muslims here who've gone to support conflict in other places of the world, and there are Muslims here who try to recruit people to join in with that cause. But that does not mean all Muslims. And the Muslims that I meet and work with would tend to be the ones, I suppose, who are saying, I'm doubting whether that can be anything to do with my faith, for very good Quranic reasons. So there is an organisation, and you may or may not know about it, which is called MAMA, which is Measuring Anti-Muslim Attacks. And there's some really useful posters on their website. I have sent them out from time to time to some of my teacher networks here, because I think sometimes it's helpful to have those things up about doing these things. If you experience these things, this is wrong, you should report this to the police. Not only for the sense of staff, but also sometimes for our children and young people to see what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And actually, as a society, we're saying these things are not acceptable. That's enshrined in our laws. Okay. So from the research of these two programs, it was interesting that they were saying that there's a lot more women suffering sort of from Islamophobic attacks on them. And when I was reading that, one of the things that people were saying about that was that generally a woman on her own or with young children is a much easier target than a man. So I suppose that tells us something about the people who are doing these attacks and actually not necessarily being very strong in their own resilience, but also that women who wear a veil, a niqab, so that their face is covered, that this was the group that sort of had the most abuse. And so to the outward world, I suppose, they are the people that look the most Muslim. And so they were the ones who achieved the most abuse. And again, it just sort of sickens, I'm sure, your heart as well as mine, that people are being judged on the outside, and that's what prejudice does. So there was a whole bit of analysis done, it's a bit old now, from newspapers, but they were looking there, and the reason I put the quotes in was that they said that often where the word Muslim is used in newspapers, in the media, is it's linked to conflict. Now, if that message is going into children day after day after day, week after week after week, no wonder they begin to put these ideas together that Muslim people are not peaceful people, Muslim people are people who are fighting. And also this picture of the Western Muslims being separate entities and often set against one another. And that's not true either. Again, it's an oversimplification. Also fascinating, and something that I think is important for us as educationists to think about with children, is that therefore, if you're a Muslim in this country, even though you may have the same qualifications as someone else, you haven't got the same employment opportunities as that person. And that's quite shocking when you start to read about those things. And so it's important, whether we have Muslim children in our class or not, that actually we're helping those who may be in a more monocultural situation to be making those judgments around employability, around who a person is and what they can do, not their name tag, not what they look like, not through what they're wearing. And if children do not come face to face with people of other faiths and other traditions from their own, then we allow ignorance and fear to still be part of that discussion that's going on in their mind, and also in the way that their worldview is being formed. And so it's really important that we are challenging these prejudices and recognising what's within our society and being reflective practitioners, helping others to think these things through, or children particularly, and young people to think it through. What was also interesting about the research done around work for Muslim people in Britain today was also that it's Muslims who live in the poorest, most deprived areas who were the hardest to find work and employment. So this comes behind other groups like white British and all sorts of things, that was the hardest thing for them. And again, if we're in a situation like I am in Newham with lots of young people and children who are Muslim, then we need to be giving them the skills to be able to know how they can participate fully and contribute well to modern British society. Because actually we don't want them to become disengaged. We don't want them to see themselves as separate from Britain or separate from the West. That then becomes a sort of marginalised position where I think they become vulnerable to viewpoints of others that are not balanced and are not reasonable. So one of the things that interfaith dialogue can do is help to equip children and young people to do some critical thinking, deciding what to believe or what to do, and making reasoned judgments. And this is so important that they're able to look at the things that they feel and also look at some facts around those and be able to reflect on whether their opinion, their feeling is valid or not. And I suppose as I was watching that programme about white flight from Newham last night, one of the things I was thinking there that people didn't have or were not challenged with in that programme was other realities. So my reality as a white British person in Newham and my children's, which was directly, I suppose, opposite to what was being expressed on that programme. So it would be really interesting, wouldn't it, to allow children from similar but different viewpoints of families to come together and to talk about some of these things and to explain their experience, because it's only through face-to-face contact, it's only through I suppose discussion, not just where we express what we think, but actually discussion where we're building upon other people's thinking and we're listening to the challenge and thinking it through, that our views can grow and change and become stronger in a sense. But just because something hasn't been your experience, just because something looks fearful or something is different, it doesn't necessarily follow that it is that. And so it's so important that we're giving young people in our schools these opportunities to be challenged around some of these ideas that are flying around, particularly on the internet, and they'll be on it more than we ever are. So what do we need to do? So we do need to challenge people's views, and this is really important, around religion, and thinking particularly about Judaism and Islam, which we find in our society, and especially around intolerant attitudes towards religion, towards worldviews, towards minority religions. All of those equally valid. And I think one of the great ways we can do that is by using facts and real life examples. I was on Twitter earlier today and I retweeted a lady and what she was doing today, that through the sort of internet, she was having a video conference between her class, another class in this country, and another class in another country, around a religious issue. And so they were doing this video conferencing, and that's through an organisation called Face to Faith, and you can find out more online about them. And so even if we're in a monocultural, mono-religious setting or a school, we have got the internet to help us to have some of these face-to-face conversations, so that children and young people can begin to see the way they thought of somebody is maybe not the reality. And I do think case studies and real life examples are very powerful to get past stereotypes. And as teachers, we need to be able to use our professional judgment as to choose good things to use. We've also got to make sure that in the pictures we use and in the books that we use, that we are not propagating, I suppose, unfair or sort of prejudiced attitudes and stereotypes, but actually we want to try and contradict these. So if we know this is how the kids are thinking about something, we want to get them to think about it in a different way. And that again is where you need support from the team that are around you. I find it easier to think creatively with other people. I have to speak everything out loud to ever understand anything, which is very annoying for those people who understand everything by being quiet. I understand that, but that's teamwork, isn't it? Different things in different ways for different people. So practical activities, what could you do this next week, week after? Well, if you have a look on the Interfaith Explorers website, you'll find a whole number of things that you can pick up and use. And if you're listening to this and at secondary school, they're very easy to sort of upskill some of those that you might think are too simplistic for your class. And if you want some ideas on how to do that, then use that question box, that email, and we'll be delighted to carry on that conversation with you. So we've got to try and avoid being simplistic ourselves. That means that we need to be knowledgeable, which means we need to go to places and ask questions and find things out, and continually keep doing that as the teacher so that we're not out of touch and we're not behind. Where we don't know something, that we're honest that we don't know, and we go away and we find that out and we come back to the children. We need to ask questions and deploy tasks in our classrooms that ask the children to apply the knowledge that they're finding. And to understand how different religions might apply it, but also then to look at how religions are similar and different, to do some analysis around different views and different ideas. Obviously, there are different games, and in previous sessions we've given you some of those that you can use and worksheets that help with all of those activities. But the important thing is that we're using the classroom to help children develop their critical thinking and to develop thinking skills, because those are skills for life. So when other subjects and other stereotypes come up, that they'll know the questions to ask around them. So we're going to finish today with the question from Professor Adam Dingham, and him saying that religious literacy helps us to move from tolerance to respect. And at its best, that's what can happen. And our society desperately needs young people and children who are going to be more religiously literate than my generation is. Maybe you and maybe what you do in your classroom this next few weeks can help start them on a track for doing that. So regular conversations in our classroom really help, and you know, improving our subject knowledge is really important. So if this is the first time you found us, why don't you go back and have a look at some of the other webinars that are here from the last sort of couple of years that we've been doing them. Great, we have a question in. It's always helpful. How do you actually deal with Israel and Palestine when religious identities, I don't know what the last thing, but yeah, okay, affect what's happening? I think history helps. I think you have to look at some simple or simplified history around Israel and Palestine, and that helps to explain quite a bit of what's going on. And depending on what age group of children you're working with, I think the BBC Bite-Size History website is really helpful on things like that. I also think that if you know about different denominations within Judaism and within Islam, that's also a really important help, that you're not lumping all Jews together. that you know that there are different sorts of Jews, and also that Jews politically disagree with each other, also that Muslims politically disagree with one another. And actually to look at that within Israel and Palestine is quite helpful, again, because then it doesn't fit into a stereotype, then it doesn't fit in so easily. There are these nuances, there are these differences. But I think the BBC websites, the Key Stage 2 one, are quite helpful because they're giving us information at the right level. The other place that I also go to is Newsround's website, where they have lots of films that deal with children's lives in these places. And again, I find that quite a good way in with children here, that to think about how that person's feeling and what other things that they're having to cope about in this situation. So with all of this, sometimes parents need educating as well. I know when things have come up in our schools here, that where the children are getting their information from is from home. And so how you begin to look at dealing with things like that, a number of our schools, and this will be the last thing I say, a number of our schools run sort of monthly parent discussion groups around certain issues using philosophy for children, and that's been a really effective strategy to be able to deal with some things that have come up in class without having to get certain parents in. But along with that, a strategy that goes with that and unpacks, and also that what the parents have thought and where their views have changed, that they captured those things within their newsletters and their online thing to help those messages to go home to other parents. So I think that's also an important part of it, that sometimes it's not the children that we need to react to, but think about those bigger issues. Okay, you can ask me more about that if that has not answered your question. Please do that. Thank you very much for being with us. I do hope you have a good half term when you get there. And I will see you later on in June with our next webinar, where we're continuing to look at our subject knowledge and improving that around religious literacy, so we can help children and young people to be better equipped to deal with prejudice and stereotypes in our country. Okay, thanks for being with us. Bye.